to stop Mr. Putin's war. The Prime Minister's developing something of a reputation as a Trump whisperer, so he'll no doubt be on the blower to the White House pretty quickly. But before he tries to tame the Donald, he might first need to deal with trouble brewing on the home front. His deputies getting rid of juries and hinting that we might undo Brexit. He does like a fight, that Mr. Lammy. His backbenchers cheered a bit of the budget, the spending bit. They haven't reacted to the part about savings yet. A flat economy, rows over welfare reform, plunging polls, talk of possible leadership challenges. No wonder they look miserable. We'll be joined by Work and Pensions Secretary Pat McFadden and his opposite number from the Conservatives, Helen Whately. Baroness Falkner has just finished her term as chair of the Equality and Human Rights Commission. She says Labour has abandoned women and can no longer call itself the Party of Equality. We'll speak to her live. And we'll get an expert view of the war in Ukraine and the future of the Atlantic Alliance from one of our leading military historians, Anthony Beaver. Plus, with us throughout the show, former BBC Director General and FA Chair, Greg Dyke, Times columnist, Melanie Phillips, and broadcaster and journalist, Steve Richards. Welcome to Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. If aliens were to land in London tomorrow and issue their traditional demand, "Take me to your leader," they might find themselves at a loss. Right now, it's not entirely obvious who's in charge of our affairs. Sure, we elected a bunch of people last year. There's a Prime Minister and a Cabinet. But they're in office, not necessarily in power. For example, the Chancellor wanted to cut the winter fuel allowance and reform the welfare system, but a revolt on the backbenches put paid to that. So maybe Labour MPs are the bosses now. The Supreme Court ruled that according to the law, men are people born men, and women are people born women. But in many organisations, the judges and the law are being thoroughly ignored. So maybe the trans activists are in charge. The man in number 10 Downing Street says that there's no way we're even thinking of getting back into the EU. His deputy hints, on the contrary, that rejoining a customs union could be a great idea. That's the official Deputy Prime Minister, David Lammy, by the way, not the Deputy Party Leader, Lucy Powell. And who knows what the once and maybe future Deputy, maybe future Leader, Angela Rayner, who may or may not be coming back to frontbench politics, actually thinks. And of course, there's that bloke that everyone can't stop talking about. Maybe the aliens need to pop round to the pub and chat to Nigel Farage because he seems to be setting the agenda for everyone else. Though they will need to be a bit careful. They say he's got a bit of a thing about aliens, especially the illegal ones. Let's start with the government this morning. A little earlier, I spoke to the Work and Pensions Secretary. Pat McFadden, the Prime Minister's meeting other European leaders and Mr. Zelensky tomorrow. Is he going to urge them to confront Mr. Trump over the American plan to leave chunks of Ukraine in Russian hands?
The principle behind the talks will be for Ukraine to be able to decide its own future. And this is a really pivotal moment now. Everybody wants the war to come to an end, but they want it to come to an end in a way that gives Ukraine that freedom of choice in the future. So that means a just end to the war, but also security guarantees for Ukraine in the future, and not a completely toothless organisation which is unable to decide its future. And I think that will be at the heart of the discussions tomorrow. And President Zelensky knows that he has the strong solidarity of the United Kingdom and indeed of the leaders of France and Germany, who will also be at the meeting tomorrow.
Well, there's obviously going to be a conversation. They'll reach some conclusion. And on past experience, it'll be Mr. Sakir who gets to make the first phone call to the White House because they think of him as a Trump whisperer. And is he going to be able to say to Mr. Trump, look, the 28-point proposal you make really isn't what the Ukrainians want. You need to back off this.
I think that 28-point proposal has evolved since it was first presented, and the European leaders have played a role in that, as of course has the Ukrainian leadership itself. So there are a lot of points to be discussed, but the principle will be the same, which is to let Ukraine decide its own future here and not to reward Russian aggression, both in terms of the end state on the battlefield, but perhaps even more importantly, in terms of Russia's ability to dictate Ukraine's future.
All right, let's talk about your own territory. You're promising this morning that nearly 1 million young people on universal credit will benefit from training or work under the Youth Guarantee Scheme. Does that mean that if they don't take up the offer, or as you put it in the press release, engage with the scheme, that their benefits under universal credit will be withdrawn?
Yeah, they could be. We see this as both an offer and an obligation. I look at a lot of slides in the Department of Work and Pensions, and some of the slides that have struck me most in the few months that I've been in there have been the ones showing the rising number of young people not in education, employment or training, not for the last year or 6 months, but for the last 4 years or so. That's when it really started to rise. But 4 years ago,
post-COVID,
it was about 2/3 of a million. It's now about 1 million. So it's gone up very significantly since then. It's an international problem too. I was speaking to G7 employment ministers the other day, all talking about the same issue. And the idea behind the youth guarantee proposals that we are announcing today, and we'll more to say tomorrow, is to offer those young people a better future. And I think this should be a Labour cause because it's an issue not just of unemployment, but of inequality too. These numbers are worse in the poorest parts of the country.
Why do you think that happened?
Why did
that rise in number of young people not in employment or training or education?
Look, I think there's probably a number of reasons. Some of this, because it's international, leads me to think there are some deep-seated labour market issues going on, which don't just apply to the UK, but apply internationally too. There may be some post-COVID effects here. But however it happened, I think we need a more active response to it. And that's why we're offering the things in the Youth Guarantee about work coach help, training opportunities, and ultimately, for the long-term youth unemployed, subsidised employment itself. Because what I want to see, Trevor, this is really important, is young people in the habit of getting up in the morning, doing the right thing, going to work, that experience of that obligation, but also the sense of pride and purpose that comes with having a job.
It's really interesting. I want to come on to talk about the issues of morality and psychology in a second, but just on the specific question of the guarantee, you said a moment ago that there would be sanctions, or they could be applied for those who do not engage, and this is what the announcement says, don't engage, for a good reason. What would be a good reason for somebody not to engage with the offer?
Well, look, you know, this is down to the work coach themselves. You might have a family emergency on the day that your appointment was. There can be a good reason now and again, but the basic principle is we are making an offer, the country's making an offer, or the government on behalf of the country, of training, work experience, ultimately a subsidised job. The option that we don't want people to have is just to sit at home and not engage with that offer.
So in essence, you're making a pretty clear offer, and it is an offer that a young person cannot refuse.
Well, there's a lot of options in it. You can have training, you can have work experience.
But the point is...
But doing nothing should not be an option.
The benefits get taken away if they say, except in extremists, if they say, I'm not doing it, can't be bothered.
If someone just took that attitude, yes, they would then be subject to the obligations that are already part of the system.
OK, well, that's quite a big call. Let's talk about the welfare reform more generally. Over the time I've been doing this job, minister after minister sat in that seat insisting that the abolition of the two-child cap was unaffordable. in July last year, you whipped your MPs to prevent it being dropped. And then 10 days ago, you suddenly decided it was affordable after all. And not only was it affordable, but according to the Prime Minister, it was your moral mission to scrap the cap. Are you going to apologise to the 7 Labour MPs that you kicked out of the parliamentary party because they voted against keeping the 2-child cap?
Well, let me say 2 things. First of all, the manifesto that we fought the election on said that we would reduce child poverty. There are a number of ways to do that. We set up a task force immediately after the election that worked through all this, the conclusions of which...
You kept telling me this way you couldn't afford to do it.
Well, we had to... The second thing I was about to say is we did have to identify how you pay for that, and we've done that in several ways. We are making savings from cracking down on fraud and error in the benefit system. They've been scored by the OBR, and the Chancellor announced an extra taxation provision on online gambling too. And I do believe that when you make a spending commitment, you've got to say how you're going to pay for it. So I understand the motivations of people who said we should have done this earlier, they wanted it done, but it's important, if you're going to run a responsible government, to say how things are paid for.
Well, you know what the informed viewer is already saying? Every single Chancellor says, we're going to crack down on waste. I think the number that you've got I'd have to go to the book, but I think the number you've said this time round is 5 billion. It has never been reached before. And the gambling tax, by the way, and the gambling tax isn't reserved for this. You could have done this at any point.
We'd still have had to have said how we were going to pay for it.
Well, why didn't you?
Because we've now identified how we're going to pay for it. And I should say about this 2-child limit is an important thing to say about this. It shouldn't just be seen as the redistribution of cash. This is about the story of people's lives, which brings me back to our first discussion.
I want to come to that.
About young people, because those children who grow up in poverty do end up doing worse at school and having worse employment prospects. So from my seat, I don't see this just as the redistribution of cash, but an investment in their opportunity.
I want to ask you about that investment. You say that the 2-child cap was going to lift 450,000 children out of poverty. Now, I can understand how that works on a spreadsheet. But the thing is, you can't know that it's going to lift any child out of poverty. There's a £3,500 extra going to a parent for the 3rd child now, but you've got no way of knowing that money is actually going to go to a child. And the only assessment of the withdrawal of benefits that's been done, which is by the Institute for Fiscal Studies, actually concludes that it made no impact at all. Now, why is this the pathway to dealing with child poverty, rather than, as for example, advanced by the former Education Secretary, Lord Blunkett, putting more money into Sure Start?
Well, you say it had no impact. Child poverty actually rose by 900,000 between 2010 and 2024, and the impact...
But we don't know that had anything at all to do with withdrawing.
You're saying it's a coincidence?
From the 3rd child.
I don't think so. And the impact of the system that's been in place, which we're now changing, was an extra 100 children a day were going into child poverty. It wasn't static. So I would push back on the sense that it had no impact. Now, Lord Blunkett, I hugely admire and respect, and I think he would warmly agree with me that a stronger offer to young people, matched by obligations, was an appropriate response to the NEETs issue. Maybe not a complete response, but he would agree that campaigning to stop young people drifting into a life on benefits and doing nothing is a Labour cause, a cause for increased equality as well as opportunity, and something we should get behind.
All right. Well, look, we're short of time, so I want to move on. The Deputy Prime Minister has hinted over the last couple of days. Oh, no, he hasn't hinted at all. He simply said that other countries have benefited from being in a customs union with the EU. Bracket, we would benefit too. Do you agree?
Well, we just conducted 3 trade deals this year. and that's a pretty big difficulty if you're going to join a customs union. And they were really important with the United States, with India, with the European Union itself. And so, look,
so he's wrong, and that's not happening. I mean, just let's be clear about it.
I think the Prime Minister's made that pretty clear in terms of the grand architecture of the EU. By grand architecture, I mean the single market and the customs union. But where, I do want to stress is we do have a different approach to the European Union from the last government. We're not nationalists. This Ukraine issue, with which we began the interview, has really brought European leaders together. We don't seek to blame the EU for everything, and we do want a closer, more productive relationship where we can take away some of those costs and delays which are a result of the Tory Brexit.
I understand the mood music. I just wanted to be absolutely clear that the Deputy Prime Minister was basically off track in what he said. So we're clear. Let's talk about another issue which is on ground that, as you know, I spent some time on. Baroness Falkner, formerly chair of the Equality and Human Rights Commission, accuses the government of sitting on the guidance that reflects the Supreme Court clarification on sex and gender from earlier this year. And she said it's because the government is running scared of backbenchers who don't like the law. Why don't you just get on with it? Or is she right? The government's just trying to stall?
No, this is about getting it right. The Supreme Court has clarified the situation, but the guidance will have to apply across a whole range of sectors and organisations. It's important to get this right, because if you don't get it right, organisations will end up in further legal jeopardy. So we want to be clear with them, we want to do it properly, we want to consult and talk to...
But you guys have been talking about you've been talking about this to the HRC for what? I think, as I understand it, since April, and I know there've been a lot of back and forth. But we know, for example, this week, your own party has announced that the Labour Party's Women's Conference will be open only to biological women. Girl Guiding and the Women's Institute have managed to sort themselves out. The government can't sort itself out yet?
Well, we made our decision at Women's Conference because as a result of the Supreme Court decision, we've had the draft guidance since September, I think, not since April. And it's important to get this right because what the government has to do is to give guidance not to one organisation, but to the whole of society about how this Supreme Court judgment is implemented. And the bottom line is the Supreme Court judgment will be implemented. That will mean change, and the guidance will advise organisations how they should do
How soon?
that. Well, I can't give you a date.
Weeks, months?
We'll get it right rather than giving an arbitrary date.
All right. I'm reading this morning in my newspaper that the Labour Party's biggest donor, the Unite Union, is thinking of disaffiliation. How would you cope without Unite's millions?
I think I read this story every few months, usually about the same union.
Sharon Graham said it might be true this time.
So maybe it's true this time. Look, I would regret it, but we would survive and go on.
And she's not... Isn't she right that you're taxing her members while you're giving a leg up to millionaires and billionaires?
Look, I think this is a good government for working people. We've seen rises in the minimum wage, we've seen help with energy bills, we've seen a freeze in rail fares in the budget, we've seen a whole range of measures that will help Unite's members. I think the trade union relationship is valuable and important, but of course, that's a decision that's up to them.
OK, just by the way, speaking of Unite members, I believe that the former deputy leader, Angela Rayner's Unite member, how soon is she going to be back on the front bench? And presumably you'd welcome that.
Well, I think Angela Rayner's great. I would welcome it, but this is a decision for the Prime Minister. I've worked with a few Prime Ministers and people think Prime Ministers are all-powerful. Actually, one of their critical powers is to decide who serves on the front bench, who serves as ministers. It's an important power and it's theirs to exercise, not mine.
But I'm sure he listens to his advisers, and your advice is get her back.
Look, I think she's an enormous talent. I'm a great admirer of Angela, But that question's up to the PM.
Pat McFadden, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Well, let's see what our panel made of all that. We're joined all morning by the former BBC Director General and FA Chief Greg Dyke, the Times columnist Baroness Phillips, and the broadcaster and journalist Steve Richards. Greg, Pat McFadden, enigmatic as usual, but actually pretty punchy on the question of benefits and withdrawal of benefit from young people if they don't take up the offer.
Yes, if they do it. If that's what they are going to do, as you say, it's quite punchy. When you look at what they're offering young people, can they really do that? Are they really going to offer them all those choices? I've got my doubts. My problem with this government is, I think, personified by the ending of the two-child cap. Because if you believe in ending child poverty or trying to attack child poverty and the rest, that I suspect is seen as a good thing to do. And yet they seem to have done it as almost as a defeat. I mean, your interview with them was almost like you were forced into this, weren't you? And it seems to me that most of what this government is doing seems to be, as you hinted in your introduction, that it's all being done because it's being forced upon them and not because that's the plan. And, somehow, if they had said, our plan is one of our major tasks is to lessen child poverty, and this is what we're going to do. And if it means I'm going to have to tax the rest of you to do it, so be it.
It's a leadership question.
Yes, and a PR question. You've got to get across to the people what you're doing and why you're doing it. And that's not happening.
Melanie, I guess you'd approve of this.
Me approve of something the Labour government has done? Good gracious.
I'm stunned, but it's possible. Is the answer yes?
Look, for decades, I've been hearing successive governments say, Labour governments, we intend to lift children out of poverty. That phrase, that cliche, lifting children out of poverty. And it hasn't happened. They're still lifting children out of poverty. They're always going to be lifting children out of poverty. Now, what Pat McFadden said, which was that poor children have, much less chance of succeeding in education, of getting jobs, he missed a very crucial point. It is boys who have twice as little chance of getting a job if they come from families where there is no father. And approximately 20% of children are now brought up in fatherless families. The link between fatherlessness and poverty is so well documented and has been documented, not just poverty, but educational underachievement and work possibilities and all kinds of behavioural characteristics. It's been charted for decades, and no Labour government will grapple with this. On the contrary, what we've lived through from both Labour and Conservative administrations is basically what I would see as a willed increase in mass fatherlessness. I mean, something like 20% of children no longer live with married parents.
I want to come back to that. Steve, what did you make of the tone here?
Well, if you look at what happened in the summer with the welfare reform revolt, of the many disastrous things that happened in the summer, this was the biggest. And in some respects, the focus has been on, in inverted commas, these wishy-washy, sentimental Labour MPs who rebelled. But the other focus should have been on the way that benefit cut package was rushed, quite often targeting the wrong people in the system and so on. So it was a complete disaster. And what it lacked was two things. One was a pathway to work. And I think this is an attempt to address that. Now, as Greg says, they've got to do it, and it's really difficult. But if they do, the sequencing is much more effective. You don't just say we're going to cut benefit. There is a route into work here that we're establishing. Now, if they set that up properly, that addresses one of the issues behind the rush summer madness.
Well, sorry, of course, they had the problem with the backbenchers before. Do you think they can sell this one to their backbenchers?
I think if they can show there are genuine routes into work, yes. Not all of them. If there's an element, he implies, in effect, compulsion, doesn't he? And some, I suspect, will never buy that. But I think a lot will, because I say the issue with that revolt in the summer was cuts often to people in work, on disability benefit of some sort or another. Now, this seems to be more targeted. The problem is, once you've attempted it once and made a complete mess of it, you're constantly catching up. What they needed to do at the beginning was say, we're going to do a big equivalent of beverage with a different set of challenges now. Instead, they did one thing in a rush, and Rachel Reeves saying to Liz Kendall, I need a few more billions, cut some more. It was crazy. Now, this is a better sequencing, but they're catching up from the mess of the summer.
For those who don't follow these things as closely, Steve's referring to the Beveridge Report, 1942, I think, the founding of our welfare state.
The basis of a plan.
It was
the basis of a plan. This is what we're going to do. But, I mean, the trouble is they also, you know, they've got themselves into a situation where they promise no real big taxes on the main, increases on the main taxes. They're going to keep the triple lock, so their room to play is so small.
Yeah.
You know, they committed. I mean, it's a classic case of, you know, let's get elected, and then we discover we can't do most of it.
I'm very glad that you raised the issue of the triple lock, because I think there's something really interesting here about the way that we are, or the government's prioritising. If we look at where the money goes, I was hoping somebody was going to raise this. Here's something that's really interesting. They're going to spend 820 million on this youth guarantee scheme. And look what they're going to spend on the triple lock's projected annual cost by the end of this Parliament.
And a lot of it, I mean, I'm in there.
Me too.
You too. We don't need it. So you have to identify who needs it and who doesn't.
And who are they more frightened of? Are they more frightened of the pensioners' lobby, or they're more frightened of their backbenchers? I mean, I agree. I think that the triple lock thing is long past its sell-by date. It's an anachronism. It's offensive. This idea, you know, I mean, pensioners, we should pay due respect to the elders. They've paid in to the system all their lives, and so on and so forth. But nevertheless, I think that the balance has just tipped far too far.
It's a staggering contrast, that, isn't it? 820 million versus 15 billion.
Are you? Sorry, I'm just. As you know, I'm on a mission on this. Are you for getting rid of the triple lock, Steve?
Oh, absolutely. And you've got to
triple
lock, triple support for the scrap. But these political leaders need to learn the art of persuasion. You know, because what everyone is implying is there needs to be more targeting. Greg said, I don't need it. I think you've implied you don't need it.
I think most people watching would laugh at the idea.
So you put an argument about target. This was the problem with the whole winter fuel announcement. It was announced out of the blue without any argument about why this was being done. And so... And it is tough when pensioners vote and young people tend not to. That is part of the dynamic. But I wonder with this 16-year-old voting thing coming in.
OK, just very quickly, if I may, David Lammy sort of says with a nod and a wink, customs union, that'd be a nice thing. Any chance at all, do you think, Melanie?
With this government, I wouldn't put it past them. I think that Keir Starmer has been trying to relitigate Brexit by the back door even before Brexit happened. I remember him saying during the great trauma of trying to get out of trying to bring into practice the referendum result, he was saying that he wanted to respect that result while trying to manoeuvre so that it was negated. I think that look, all sovereign countries need to get on with other countries. Britain needs to get on with members of the European Union. That would be great. The trouble is that the European Union sees it as a very much a conditional thing. We will allow you, Britain, to be to get on with us, provided we screw you completely. And this idea that you can sort of cozy up with no ill effects, that is to say, without being trapped in some way, I think is an illusion.
I don't think you'll see it in this Parliament. I think it'll be one of the fascinating debates of the next election, because you could well end up with... Because I do think the numbers have shifted. I do think if you had the referendum today, we would not have left the EU, and you could end up with a majority of people wanting to go back in and a Farage either powerful lobby or government. And you think, this is bizarre, isn't it? But I do think at some stage we have to readdress the Howell relationship with you.
Very quickly, Steve.
Yeah, remember that theoretically the number one mission of this government was economic growth. If they want it, they should go back into the customs union as quickly as possible. I expect when Melanie says this government will do it, I suspect this government won't do it in this term, but maybe in the next term.
This argument pays no attention whatsoever to the issue of government competence. Are we suddenly giving the government a free pass of being absolutely useless in everything they're doing? Brexit gave
that's
governments...
a wider issue.
No, it's the issue. Brexit gave governments the power to do its own thing. It has been a disaster in doing its own thing. Does that mean that Brexit was wrong? No. Does it mean the government was wrong? Yes.
I'm going to stop you all there. Everybody calm down, and we'll come back. We'll come back to this a little later. Now, Baroness Falkner has just finished her term as chair of the Equality and Human Rights Commission. A very difficult job, I can tell you. She's now launched a blistering attack on Labour, saying that the party has abandoned women over issues such as trans rights and grooming gangs and can no longer call itself the party of equality and feminism. And she is with me now. Good morning, Kishra.
Good morning, Trevor.
Let's start with this issue of the guidance on sex and gender, to be precise. I spoke to Pat McFadden, the Welfare Secretary, this morning, and asked him about why it's taking so long. And he says that this guidance is so important that they can't afford to issue something that is not exactly right. He says they've only had it since September, and that's kind of reasonable, isn't it?
Dissembling. They've had it since April, the 8th of April to be exact. It's not only about sex and gender, it's an update on the 2011 code, which I think you probably wrote, which is way out of date, 14 years out of date, in 9 protected characteristics: disability, age, race, the whole gamut. They had the whole thing. We spent 2 years on it from 2022. They had the whole thing on the 8th of April, and they rightly responded.
Things have changed between 8th April and September, didn't they?
So the Supreme Court verdict was on 16th April, a few days after we gave it in to them. But they worked on it. They knew we were going to update 10%. 10% of 315 pages. That's all we needed to update in terms of the Supreme Court verdict. They responded on 30th June with several proposals, devolved administration saying this and that. Would you like to look again at this example or that example? Let me make it clear for your viewers. The guidance is just a navigational tool. The law of the land was determined on the 16th of April, nearly 8 months now. All the guidance does is say to a service provider that if you have a shopping centre in this part and you're offering these toilets, if you want to offer single-sex spaces, they must do X, and if you want to offer unisex spaces, they must do Y. It's a practical navigational tool. It is not the law.
But I don't spend too long on it, but Bridget Phillipson, I guess, would not be seen as a gender ideologist. I mean, she's known to support the Supreme Court ruling in principle. She appointed a successor to you that trans activists don't like because your successor actually supports the law as it is. Is it a bit unfair to say that she is running scared of backbenchers?
Well, Trevor, you've seen the same media reports and leaked documents that I've seen that refer to Cabinet Office ministers, people who would have worked under Pat McFadden, by the way, who do not deny that they're working with trans allies to delay the guidance, to prevent it being laid in Parliament, to change it, to water it down, I think are the words used. But you're right, we shouldn't spend too long on it because there's a difference of opinion.
But I think
I wondered if I could say something that is, I think, more important than going back and forth in a he said or she said. And that is this, that for service providers, and by the way, the guidance only affects a limited section of duty bearers, as they're called. Employment's guidance will come later for employers and so on. There's a whole series of things that will have to follow over years. For service providers and duty bearers, you're being let down by the government, but ignore that. Plus ça change. Things change, but some things don't change. It is ultimately your responsibility to comply with the law of the land. It's been 8 months that the law of the land has been clarified. So get on, get your legal advice and get on with it.
You also said, sorry.
And let me say, for trans people and women, who are the people I'm more concerned about in a way, because they're living in this kind of grey zone, if you feel that you're being discriminated against at the moment, while it's unclear how your employers or others should be, how your service providers should be offering services to you, then let me tell you that tribunals and courts are incorporating the law as it is refined right here and now, so assert your rights if you can, through your unions, through legal practitioners and so on.
You said in an interview with The Times that you thought the government had let down women. Why did you say that?
Well, it was on this most profound area where the Supreme Court said people deserving of dignity, the law, in acts that go back to 50, 60, 70 years, that privacy is your entitlement, upholding your dignity in the most intimate spaces is your entitlement. So one area is here. Grooming gangs, I think you just mentioned that in your introduction. You know, we have a situation, recently we discovered, that Sarah Sharif, that young girl who was so brutally murdered by her family, her father, we heard recently that the chance to prevent that murder was lost due to racial sensitivities. We know that it's mainly Labour-controlled councils, exposed by Andrew Norfolk at the Times, the late Andrew Norfolk, who didn't take the action they should have to prevent vulnerable young women because they were afraid of being called Islamophobic. And we have a situation now where the government has told us they're bringing in a new definition of Islamophobia that will be more speech curtailing, more speech chilling, and you will take one, at the Equality and Human Rights Commission, as you know, we're responsible for religion and belief. We are the regulator of religion and belief, discrimination. They're going to bring in yet another area where, for example, anyone who's defending women's rights is going to be accused by those ethnic minority men of Islamophobia if they dare say something about how Muslim women are suppressed. I'm a Muslim woman myself. I know all about this. I know the community.
It's quite a serious thing to say that the government is allowing practices or neglect or omissions that lead to the outcome that we saw on Sarah Sharif. It's quite a serious thing to point the finger at ministers about.
Yes, and I didn't see any ministers. It is incredibly serious. The murder of a child in those brutal conditions is pretty serious. What's happened to young girls in our northern towns, well, look at London, or is happening here, resisted by the mayor. These are fairly serious things, Trevor. Are women's lives, women's dignity not worth a serious discussion? And let me say one other thing. It is, a lot of people describe my defense of free speech or my defense of certain rights as, oh, these are culture wars. No, you can't disregard 51% of the population on the basis of a bit of a culture war. These are profound, foundational and fundamental rights. And it is serious. And I don't believe this government is taking it seriously. I can give you another example. If you want to talk about the jobs of part-time women, more vulnerable women that may well be lost due to the advance of AI, there doesn't seem to be any strategy to deal with that. You have a government that is, these are precarious jobs. They're jobs mainly done by women, in women who need more flexible working, who have other responsibilities, childcare and so on. You have government increasing minimum wage, slapping national insurance contributions onto employers and so on, where employers think if the cost of employment becomes so high, why don't I move to automation?
Oh,
So a strategy to deal with that would be helpful.
If the cabinet minister was sitting here, he or she would say, this is quite a broadside against the government that delivered the 2010 Equality Act, which is the act that, well, I for a little while, but you for the whole of your term, were mandated to implement.
Profoundly
and some of this
important
is your
piece of
responsibility.
legislation. A profoundly important piece of legislation.
Are you saying that you think that the Labour Party that brought in that legislation has somehow lost its way?
Yes. And I think particularly the unexpected gains in the last election resulted in a lot of people who came from certain sectors, the NGO sector, advocacy sectors and so on, who really didn't get the time to bed in terms of what being a legislator is about. We did, on the Code of Practice, we did parliamentary briefings with MPs. So we, in that sense, I can tell you, my heart sank. They didn't have an idea of the Equality Act at all.
You use quite strong terms in a newspaper interview. You talked about Labour abandoning women and Labour no longer being the party of equality. Do you really believe that?
I hope not. I hope that they don't abandon women, because then we're in a really dark place. I'm hoping that by speaking out now, that the women in the Labour Party will sit up and take note and realise that the foundational principles of many of the rights that I'm talking about are meaningful, and they will fight for them.
The Prime Minister, again, if he were in the studio, would say you're aiming at the wrong target. I don't think you've spoken publicly on the issue of Nigel Farage's alleged behaviour as a schoolboy. Isn't that a bigger problem than the Labour Party?
Look, this is a situation I feel actually quite confused and disturbed by. You have a situation where, when you read these allegations in terms of what is attributed to him, it looks utterly ghastly on paper. And then you try and contextualise it, and you think, this is perhaps 50 years ago. You know, young people say all sorts of things at school. When you're teenagers, you say and do all sorts of things. And I think it's worth, perhaps, while condemning what he's done, to reflect on one thing that confuses me.
We have to insert the word allegedly.
Yes, allegedly done. But the one thing that slightly confuses me about him, and I hear his contextualisation of it all, is why can't he just offer an unreserved apology for any distress caused? I just don't get it. It seems to me that would be the most genuine thing to say if he's genuinely not a racist.
Just very quickly, we could, of course, you and I could talk about this forever. 30 seconds. You're leaving this job, and I think one of your concerns is state of integration.
Yes. I mean, I referred to that in my newspaper interview. I'm deeply concerned about, because we have very large numbers of people, newcomers, arriving here, much larger than in the time that you and I have been involved in these matters. And we have an approach in the United Kingdom, a long-standing approach, which is very different to continental Europe, France, Italy, Germany, of allowing people to live within their communities, to be completely autonomous, friends and relatives, and never know what's happening around them. And we don't seem to have some civic virtues, some social mores and norms that we can say, this is the social contract, let's all sign up to it, you've come here, welcome, but this is what we're about.
OK. Keisha Falkner, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Right, well, back to our panel. Greg, Melanie and Steve. Well, Melanie, what do you make of that?
Well, I think Baroness Falkner is basically right. I think there are two enormous lobbies of which the Labour government, and in fact previous Conservative government, has run scared. One is the trans lobby, and the other is the anti-Islamophobia lobby, which from my point of view seeks to suppress all criticism of anything in the Islamic world. Now, I think the Baroness makes a very compelling point that there is no intrinsic reason for such a delay in the government coming forward with its guidance. And it seems to me, I mean, I don't know about Bridget Phillipson, maybe, as you suggest, she is pretty pro, biological sex determining what a woman is, what a man is. But we all know that, there are lots of cabinet ministers and members of parliament, and beyond them, the sort of institutional forces of the official class who, in typical Sir Humphrey fashion, will make it impossible for even the best intentioned of ministers to get on with it. And I suspect that's what's happened in terms of the trans guidance.
Steve, I have to say, people often accused me of being mildly outspoken. I don't think I would have given the both barrels that Trevor Phillips did.
No, and I think, with respect to her, it combined, that interview and others, sort of highly charged language. Abandoning women, I think that's way over the top, and not recognising the complexity of navigating this issue of trans, which I wouldn't want to navigate. I'm up for putting the case against Melanie about Brexit or welfare and so on. It is really complex for a government to sort out. And then, then we got on to kind of AI and the impact of work. Well, that's another huge issue, completely unrelated to the other one. And then suddenly a bit of nuance with Farage saying, well, what about the context of the 70s? But then saying he should apologise, and that would be to acknowledge he did it, whereas he's being much more evasive than that. So I think there was quite a lot of highly charged language and naivety about politics in all of this.
Greg?
I think, on Farage, I don't think for her to say he should just apologise, that means that he's going to have to accept he said it.
Yeah.
And the moment he does that, he's in deep trouble.
Yeah.
Deep trouble.
Yeah.
I can see that, I can see almost the poster at the next election. Hitler was right. Farage.
Yeah, we can come back to that. I have a view about that, but these are all allegations. I think there's a politics of it. But what do you think about the more general point that she is making about the government's... what she's saying by implication is that ministers see this set of issues as third rail issues that they'd rather not.
I don't think this government sees, and again, it comes back to what I was talking about earlier, the whole thing about women and women in our society, the government could have made their own, and they haven't. And again, if something changes, they'll be forced to go there. And it seems to me that it's a government of reaction to things as opposed to the plan. Now, the plan does also mean you've got the things you say, we're not doing that this time. We can't do it because there's only 4 things or 5 things we can actually do. But you've got to have that sort of plan, and there's no sign of it.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, though obviously I have no views about anything, having sat in Trevor Falkner's seat, one of the things I think is probably true about what Melanie said is that there is a reluctance in the machine, if I can put it this way, in Whitehall, to recognise and implement the Supreme Court judgment, because I think there are a lot of people in that area who just don't like it, and it's a really interesting example of a wider problem that I think is facing government, that they think that when a minister says, let's do this, it gets done.
Yes.
And actually, I suspect that here, exactly the opposite is happening.
But anyone could have told them that going in, couldn't they? The idea that you just say, we're in charge now, do that. Well, you've got to be very detailed and really know how to do it, because actually institutions can easily stop you doing almost anything.
Yeah.
Right. Next, we will speak live to the Shadow and Work and Pension Secretary, Helen Whately.
What might happen if Russia attacked the UK?
This is clearly an enormous show of force.
It is definitely out of the ordinary.
We ran a war game with former ministers back in the hot seat.
Ben Wallace.
Amber Rudd.
Jack Straw.
It's the kind of war game that's genuinely tested inside government.
The Russians are signalling that there may be an attack.
Russia knows our weaknesses, but do you? I'm Deborah Haynes. From Sky News and Tortoise, this is The War Game. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club. Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Stephen Murphy and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin.
The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks.
If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach. This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
Let's get the view from the Conservatives now with the Shadow Work and Pension Secretary. Helen Whately, are you going to back the government's guarantee of 900,000 jobs for, or training places for young people?
Well, I mean, so what we've seen today announced by the government is spending the best part of £1 billion on work placements and government-created jobs for young people. That sounds all very well, but the fact is, and it's the absurdity of it, is just 2 weeks ago we had a budget from the Chancellor which is expected to destroy 200,000 jobs. A year ago we had a budget from Labour which was destroying 150,000 jobs. And we know that the jobs that have been particularly hit by Labour's policies, like the jobs tax, that national insurance rise, are jobs for young people. For instance, jobs in hospitality, where around 90,000 jobs have been lost. So the problem we have here is a government whose policies are destroying jobs, destroying opportunities for young people, now saying they're going to spend taxpayers' money on creating work placements. It's just simply the wrong answer. I mean, to me, give me a moment, it's a classic Labour approach to a problem where they think government has got the answers when actually government is the problem.
Or would you rather they didn't provide 900,000 training places?
So there is a time and a place for programmes that support people who are struggling to get into work, whether it's...
Why isn't that time and place now?
Let me just finish. For instance, supporting people with skills, supporting people with work readiness. Now, I speak to lots of charities, for instance, that organise these kind of work placements and programmes. And I say, there's a time and a place, and some of them are really helpful when somebody is particularly missing on the skills that are needed for the jobs in their area. And when we were in government, we had some programmes like this. But it's not an answer if what you're doing is faster than you can support people to get into work, destroying the jobs that actually would otherwise be out there. This is the problem.
I don't quite understand. I can understand if you're saying, I wouldn't start from here, but here is where we are. Are you saying that they shouldn't do this programme, or are you saying you'd rather they didn't have to, but we will support it?
And we'll look at the details of the specific plans that they have and whether they've really worked out what is the best way to do this, because, you know, if you target schemes effectively to people in particular areas and particular barriers, then you can help people with difficulty getting into work. So I'm not saying, as I said, it's a time and place for this. But the bigger problem they have is what they're doing to destroy jobs and also destroying the incentives to work. So let me just talk about that. So on destroying jobs...
I just want to deal with this particular thing today.
I talk to lots of employers who say to me, because of Labour's taxes, they aren't able to employ young people. They can't afford to employ young people, or they can't take a risk on young people, for instance, the Employment Rights Bill that's coming forwards. So that's what the government should first and foremost be fixing, along with the incentives to work, which they're totally failing to tackle that. So people are just saying, why bother working?
Let me put to you this point about incentives. I talked to the Welfare Secretary, Pat McFadden, this morning, and he said pretty clearly that unless you had a really, really good reason for not taking up one of the offers of training or education or employment, they would withdraw benefits. That's a pretty good incentive, isn't it?
Well, let's see what they do in practice. Their record on being tough on these sorts of things is not a good one.
But in principle, you think that's a good approach?
Well, let me... So yes, I do agree that if somebody is given an opportunity to work and they don't take it, they shouldn't be able to continue receiving benefits. But the number one reason why people and young people are becoming neat and not in employment, education or training is because they're moving on to sickness benefits. Yet we just saw a few months ago where Labour was attempting to make some reforms to this problem, people going on to sickness benefits. They U-turned. They abandoned their reforms. They have no plans in the foreseeable future to do anything about this fact that you can have a higher income on benefits than in work.
I get the critique. Can we just talk about what you might do? And I know it's early days and you haven't got detail and all of that, but I was very struck by your leader's Wilberforce lecture this week. She quoted St. Paul, and she said, anyone who does not provide for his own household is worse than an unbeliever. Does that mean that a Conservative government would cut benefits to families where you judge the parents aren't doing enough to support children, for example?
So the approach that we're bringing, and Kemi is leading the way on this, is coming at the challenges for our country, particularly in welfare, with a set of principles and a set of Conservative principles. One of those, for instance, is personal responsibility. First and foremost, you should be making sure, if you possibly can, you're paying your own way, you're supporting your own family. Fairness. I mean, we know people feel at the moment it's really unfair. Let me just talk about unfairness.
She says, St. Paul says, worse than an unbeliever, i.e., essentially, you're going to be punished if you don't find a way of supporting your family. That's quite a different approach to welfare than the one we've had for the last 70 or 80 years. No,
as I said, the approach that we're taking on welfare is one of personal responsibility. It's one of fairness. So we've got a situation where people are saying, hold on, the person down the street from me who's on benefits and isn't working and could be working is better off than somebody who's working really hard and has just seen their taxes going up. That isn't right. And the other thing is for welfare to be a safety net. That's what it should be, but it's got completely out of control. Okay. I've been doing some work on the Motability scheme, these free cars that go to people, which was meant to be cars for people who have severe disabilities, but in fact they're going to people for tennis elbow, acne, ADHD, and there are people whose taxes have gone up to fund a car who can't even afford a car for themselves. It's unfair. It's not the way our welfare system should be working.
If I may ask, I'd like to ask you about another topic. You voted for Brexit. Would you agree with David Lammy that the experience since 2016 has demonstrated that we'd be better off with a closer relationship, if not membership of the EU, but a closer relationship, for example, negotiating a customs union?
Well, I mean, I feel like people don't want the Brexit arguments rehashed, but we did go through them and we can talk about it again. And the fundamental problem with being in the customs union but being outside the European Union is that you don't have influence over the rules and regulations that come to you as you're part of the customs union. But you've got to abide by them. So what David Lammy is suggesting is the worst of all worlds. It's having to abide by the rules of the EU without being able to influence them. It is not the right answer.
All right. One other thing that's been much in the news this week, one other person, and Mr. Nigel Farage. Do you believe the accusations against him, and do they matter to you?
Well, I think first and foremost that Nigel Farage should be straight with the public on this question. There's some very serious accusations about things that he has said and about the question of racism, and he needs to give people a straight answer.
So you think he's been weaselling, do you?
Well, have you heard the words, and you've probably got them in front of you, that he'd said in a press conference about this? It didn't sound to me like a straight answer, and I think what the public want from politicians of all parties is straight answers.
So no Reform Conservative deal, all right?
No, not at all.
Helen Whately, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you very much.
Well, we watch it so you don't have to. England have lost the second Ashes Test in Brisbane by 8 wickets. Australia lead the series 2-0. And no England team has come back from that since Bradman, I think, in 1932. Pause. Next, we'll speak to historian Anthony Beaver.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
The war in Ukraine has been raging for almost 4 years. In reality, it started back in 2014 when Russia began to invade and occupy Ukrainian territory. Hundreds of thousands have died. Indeed, more Russians have died taking one Ukrainian town than the Soviets lost in their entire decade-long campaign in Afghanistan. With Putin rejecting Donald Trump's peace plan an end to the war seems as far away as ever. Let's talk now to the military historian, Anthony Beevor. Anthony, it's a real pleasure to have you on the programme. What's your assessment of the balance of forces now there?
Well, there's no doubt about it. The Ukrainians are struggling. The Russians are piling in men, irrespective of their losses. And this is always one of the terrifying things about Russia. You know, they treat their own soldiers as badly as they treat their enemy almost. And the casualty rate is horrific, but they can still go on doing it. The Ukrainians are running out of people. There's no doubt about it.
How long do you think they can hold out?
Well, most people are only talking about to the spring. I would certainly hope it'd be longer, because what we are certainly seeing is that Putin has no intention whatsoever of really making peace. And we are in an extraordinary position. Here we are seeing peace negotiations not carried out by diplomats or statesmen, but being carried out by businessmen.
This is Mr. Putin's envoy, Witkoff.
And Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. And I mean, what are they doing? Are they dividing up the spoils of war or of basically thug diplomacy? It's not a question of looking for a just peace at all. So from that point of view, one sees the terrible fate of Ukraine of almost having to fight on even when it knows it may be losing. So they know what a Russian occupation consists of, and the sheer cruelty and horror of what's happened in the areas which have been taken.
Your books about Stalingrad and your more recent one about Russia paint in vivid terms the awfulness of the slaughter in war. And I was thinking, as we were thinking about this interview, of the description that you have in Russia, in the book, in the 2023 book, Russia, of the way that people were lifted on bayonets. How does what's going on now compare with that example from the First World War?
Well, this was much more the Russian Civil War, in fact, where the ferocity, the savagery was definitely conspicuous cruelty. I mean, it was sadism in many ways. People were being tortured not to extract information, but just purely out of anger, bitterness, whatever it may be. And a lot of this comes over from the way, as I was saying, that the Russians treat their own people so badly. It becomes the knock-on theory of oppression. Because their boys are so badly treated, they will then take it out on the most vulnerable. And we saw this in 1945 with the mass rapes carried out by the Red Army. And, you know, there are great debates amongst historians. How far does it go back? Does it go back to the 13th century and all the rest of it? But there's no doubt about it. I mean, Russia does have a different attitude to warfare and believes in conspicuous cruelty as a weapon of war.
It's worth saying, by the way, that you were banned in Russia for making exactly this point. Are you still banned there?
Well, I'm liable to 5 years imprisonment, put it that way. Sergei Shoigu brought in this law saying anybody who insulted the Red Army in the Second World War was liable to 5 years, but, you know, one has no idea.
You've mentioned the negotiations that's been taking place between the Americans and the Russians. What do you think the White House is doing? Are they playing a smart game, or are they being played by Putin?
They're being totally played. I mean, Putin despises Trump. I mean, as far as he's concerned, he's his useful idiot. It's just like Lenin's version. And we know this, for example, from the Osaka conference in 2019, when Putin was starting to tease Trump. He said to him, Mr. Trump, I've done much more for Israel than people realize. And Trump slammed the table and said, nobody's done as much for Israel as I have. And Putin said, President Trump, perhaps they should rename their country after you. And Putin, Trump, looked at him in astonishment for a moment and then said, no, I think that would be going a bit too far. Well, that was all recorded by Fiona Hill, who was sitting in on the conversation.
Wow. If the Americans, for whatever reason, decided essentially to walk away or not to provide the kind of support that they have done thus far, do you think the Europeans could effectively fill that void?
with difficulty. It depends to what degree Trump is still prepared to sell weapons. I mean, the American and arms industry is so important, and the Europeans are not quite in a position to catch up rapidly. We're in the worst position of all. I mean, we have no ammunition, or virtually no ammunition. I mean, the British Army couldn't last more than sort of 10 days before running out of ammunition in a conflict.
Seriously?
Yes, seriously. I mean, we are the first duty of a government is to provide the defence of the country. It is their very first priority. But I mean, what do we see? I mean, even in this latest budget, money can be found from somewhere to pour into the bottomless pit of welfare dependency. But I mean, there isn't still the money yet to replace the ammunition and weapons which are being given to Ukraine.
If I may come back finally to Ukraine, Anthony, what realistically do you think the best outcome that we can hope for?
Well, the best outcome we could hope for is basically enough pressure being put on Russia economically, and especially whether it's confiscation of sovereign wealth funds and things like that in Europe, which I'm afraid certainly the Belgians are frightened about to a very large degree. But the only way is somehow to hold back Putin's war machine. But I mean, the trouble is that his whole economy is geared up to a war economy. And as history has shown, once you've geared up your economy to that degree, it's very hard to wind it back. So what will he go for next? I mean, I was in Norway and they are extremely frightened about or seemingly concerned about what's happening in the Baltic states or liable to happen there. What about Moldova? I mean, after Ukraine, where does Putin go next?
Anthony Beaver, I wish we could talk more about this, but I have to go to a bit of breaking news. But thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you very much.
We're going to pause now for a moment because we do have some breaking news on an incident at Heathrow Airport in West London. Our correspondent Emma Birchley can give us some more details now. Morning, Emma. What do we know?
Hello, yes. Well, we've heard from Heathrow Airport that this incident has happened within the multi-storey car park in Terminal 3 at the airport. We know that armed response units have been called. You can see their fire engines, also a large number of ambulances. According to London Fire Brigade, it was at 8:14 this morning that they were called to this incident, firefighters still at the scene. And it was declared a significant incident as far as the London Ambulance Service was concerned. At around 8:40 this morning, they have what they call a full deployment of their resources, and the incident is being treated as ongoing. We know that people are being treated at the scene, but Sky News understands that those injuries are not that serious. Now, there had been major hold-ups all around when it comes to the transport network. We know that the spur road, the southbound spur road on the M4 was causing, that was closed, causing major tailbacks. We know too that there have been substantial delays on parts of the underground network, in particular on the Piccadilly line between Acton Town and the Heathrow terminal, and that National Rail has had some substantial problems, although the lines have now reopened. And that is something that National Highways are saying, is that as far as the roads are concerned, the incident has been resolved, all closures lifted, but of course it will take time to clear. However, as far as the emergency services are concerned, it would appear that this incident is very much still ongoing.
Deal. OK, thank you, Emma. Back to our panel, Greg Dyke, Melanie Phillips and Steve Richardson. Will keep you updated in case we learn anything more. We were beginning to talk about, as everybody does all the time when they're not talking about Donald Trump, about Nigel Farage. And I think I hadn't given Steve a chance to speak about this, I don't think.
Yeah, we're talking about these allegations of what was said at school. And I think his reaction has been interesting because it hasn't been a sort of unequivocal denial, but has been saying, look, it was the 70s, it was all very different. And I think it's a reminder with Farage that while he has this appeal, which is the key to the Reform Party's polling at the moment, there is also a capacity to limit that appeal and to alienate a large section of the electorate. And that kind of feeds into this. And we were talking during the break about the next election being so fascinating, because if the Reform Party are in the kind of pole position they're in now, how will voters who want to stop Farage behave? Now, they're in a majority, but will they vote tactically to stop it? And I think that feeds into it. The people who are already alienated are going to become even more alienated by these stories.
Well, you should have a look and see where they actually are on our polar coaster. I think we will see when we look at the numbers that right now none of this has actually particularly registered with the voters. Who knows, it may do. But actually, there's no sense that this is having much impact on Farage's numbers. The only thing that's really had been happening has been the extraordinary rise in the Greens, no doubt because of the prominence of Mr. Zach Polanski. But I think the most striking thing about this poll, and we say it week after week, is the steady decline in the combined Labour and Conservative vote. And I think the thing that's really makes that really interesting is that what the psephologists will tell you is that this means that if the outcome of a general election is anything like this, number one, Reform will be the biggest party, but not with a majority, but that even the smallest changes in shares could make huge changes in seats. I mean, it's a case of great instability, isn't it?
Yes, and there will also be a lot of, Steve said, a lot of tactical voting. A lot of people will vote to stop Farage. There'll be campaigns to stop Reform. I suspect this is probably as high as it gets for Farage. But even if you take the 29.3 and take it down to, say, 20, 25, it still has a profound effect on British politics.
Yeah.
We will, I think, as a result of this, I think we will see proportional representation coming in. Because
that might be a bit of wishful thinking, Greg.
No. I mean, you actually look at, strangely, the left of the Labour Party are now in favour of proportional representation. I think you'll begin to see that the old system, whereby they sorted it out almost between them, will be gone. And I think there will have to be a different voting system.
Before we go on to the BBC and Eurovision, one of the things that always strikes me, Melanie, is that we look at the numbers, but we were talking earlier on about benefits and, in a sense, the hardening of the Labour position in relation to welfare, at least whether we think they can do it or not, the position, the rhetoric is harder. One of the things that's frequently said about parties like Mr. Farage's, and we've seen this across Europe, is that the important thing about them is not whether they'll win or not, it's the effect they have on everybody else. And we've seen, I think, everybody moving on immigration, now on welfare, probably on green issues as well.
I think Nigel Farage is, without question, the most consequential politician in Britain since Mrs. Thatcher, and possibly even more than Mrs. Thatcher was. And yes, what he says leads the agenda because he has this genius for having a kind of visceral understanding of where the middle ground actually is. Now, to the left, the middle ground is the right, or the far right. But the middle ground is not only not the far right or the right, it doesn't like being called that. And one of the reasons that Farage has made such headway is he has basically validated what most sensible, decent, normal people think as being fine. And that includes, past misbehaviour. People are very forgiving. I mean, I don't, for a moment, dismiss the importance of the allegations against him. To me, even, you know, what was it, 50 years ago, whatever he was at Dulwich College, I mean, you know, I was not a dissimilar age. And if somebody had hissed in my ear and said, this is a gas chamber, and Hitler was right, I would have taken that not just amiss, but I would not have forgotten it. So I think these allegations are very serious. Personally, I think he should fess up to them. And I think he should fess up to them and say what I would say, which is that that was then, it was a different context, but it was wrong. But today is a situation, we have a situation in which anti-Semitism is absolutely out of control, and that's what I am against. And I think people are actually quite forgiving. They want to know what the politician stands for now, not what he stood for then, but he has to be honest.
Can we just come back to a story that we haven't really dealt with that much on this programme, but of course it's been rumbling along, and Greg, you will no doubt have been following it, the position of the BBC. We're now seeing all these big deals with Netflix and all the rest of it. But where do you think the BBC is now?
Well, what's interesting, I think, about the big story, the recent story about the Director General leaving, which I think is a shame, but is 3 weeks ago it dominated everything. It's forgotten. It's like journalism moves on. Everything moves on. And the interesting question now is what, in a world where the whole, as you say, of the media is changing, and it's changing fast, the discussion about the licence fee, the discussion about the next charter is going to be quite profound, I think.
Have you got a candidate for the next DG?
I heard you were applying, but is it? Yeah. No, you're too old, aren't you?
I'm afraid so.
Yes. No, I had this discussion with the next DG and said, actually, I'm the wrong generation. I've been out of television really for 20 years. My generation have gone. There are people like you and I, came from that sort of generation, and it's the next generation, and I don't know them well enough. So, but there will be people, there will be good people who will want the job, despite the fact they know it's going to end up as happened with most DGs.
OK, one last thing. I don't think what viewers under 35 would forgive us for leaving this programme and not discussing Eurovision. Steve, what do you make of the boycott by, I think, now 4 nations, Ireland, Slovenia, is it? I can't remember, Netherlands?
Fair enough. If they want to make a political point, it's a very powerful way of doing so. But we talk about the BBC. You see, the BBC is safe for the time being. The Labour government is not going to dismantle the BBC. So they should be more robust and confident. And it's interesting with this Eurovision thing, because there's a lot of waffle spoken about impartiality, when quite often the BBC has to make choices itself. And this is one example, isn't it, where they've been under some pressure to boycott Eurovision, have decided absolutely not. And so this impartiality debate they can conduct with great confidence because the Labour government's not going to close it down. But it needs to be done with more, I think, nuance and clarity than just waffling and saying we're impartial and that's our great strength. And this is an example of it.
Sorry, Melanie, you spent a lot of your time in Israel now. How's this being viewed from there?
I think it's being viewed as yet another example of the so-called civilised world having lost its mind over Israel. I mean, there are 2 points about Eurovision. First of all, hello, it's a song contest. It's not supposed to be, international war by other means. Is that too much to ask? Probably it is. But secondly, this whole boycott thing about Israel and the Eurovision is part of a global attempt to turn Israel into a pariah state, which is having considerable success among the so-called educated classes across the West, on the basis of what I would suggest, and this is another conversation, are wholesale, start-to-finish lies, falsehood, distortions and demonisation in a very wicked way.
Well, as you say, that'll be another conversation, and there will be people who would definitely contest that characterisation.
Surely not.
Of the boycott movement. But anyway, I'm afraid we've run out of time. Thank you all very much. That is it for this week's show. I will be back next Sunday, believe it or not. Join us then at 08:30. By the way, Politics Hub every night at 7 o'clock.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club. 4 more years! Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.